Pay attention to this video and how some African languages got into what is called the New World.
South America, sometimes called Latin America, and of course the neighboring area, which is Central America and the Caribbean, has a very interesting history. I remember when we were being taught history, that was called the New World. New because it is the Spaniards specifically who went to that area. And it must never be forgotten that Christopher Columbus, who is said to have discovered the New World, was actually on his way to India. He got lost. And when he met the indigenous Americans, he called them the Red Indians because he thought he was in India. But that in itself makes that part of the world very unique because they were empires which had been built. The Aztecs were there, the Arawakans. If you look at what is now Mexico, they were the Mestizos, they were the Aztecs, complete with civilization. The Arawakans were to be found in what is today Honduras, in Colombia, in Costa Rica, in Panama, in Nicaragua. So there were people in that part of the world, complete with civilizations. And the Arawakans, of course, we know, were completely decimated by the Spaniards. The Spaniards went there, and the Spaniards were in Mexico, what is today Mexico, in Nicaragua. They were in Honduras, in Colombia, and of course the Portuguese then found their way in what is today Brazil. The British somehow found their way in modern-day Belize. And the French also found themselves in areas such as the Suriname. And even the Dutch found themselves in what is called the Dutch Antilles. So these new lands became the subject of slavery initially because the local peoples were decimated deliberately by military action and also by disease, because these individuals came with certain diseases which were unknown in that part of the world, particularly the Spaniards and the British, as I've already said, and the net effect is that whole populations were dominated and completely eliminated in certain cases, so that if you go into the Arawakans now, the people who are called the Arawakans, who then moved into the island that is called St. Vincent and Grenadines. Their language was wiped away, but is now being revived. If you hear of a language called the Garifuna, that is the language which is spoken by the Arawakans. But most of the slaves that then found themselves in that part of the world were slaves that were taken to that part of the world. When they had decimated the local population, that is why the Portuguese now started taking people to Brazil. And Brazilians, if you go to Brazil, there is a very large population of Yorubas. There is also a very large population of Ovambo and of Imbundu from what is today Angola and also Mozambique. So once again, you can see it is the colonizers who are coming from their colonies or the areas that they had conquered in the African continent and taking them to Latin America. The Spaniards also took people from their colonies in different, and some of them were not even their colonies, but they took them from Africa in the area that is now called Equatorial Guinea. A lot of Equatorial Guineans were taken out of there, and Sao Tome and Principe, and we find them in the Spanish colony. The British, of course, as we know, took their people from their slaves from Ghana, from Nigeria, from the Gambia, and from Liberia, and from Sierra Leone, and they found themselves in Trinidad and Tobago. In Trinidad and Tobago, you find a large population of people who are of Igbo origin and Yoruba origin. And
I am oftentimes confronted by the people who are saying, we are already here, we're already here. And no doubt that there were native and indigenous people who were already here in America. This is true. And no doubt that some of those people were made into slaves. That's true as well. But when you deny the fact that the Yoruba population went into Brazil in large numbers and also came to the Americas, that in the Caribbeans they came in large numbers, and other African tribes came in large numbers to the Americas during slavery, during the transatlantic slave trade, you cannot deny that fact. You also cannot deny biology, that many of the people who were indigenous to America were decimated by disease. I would even go as far as to say, if it wasn't for the fact that Cortez miraculously was able to defeat the Aztecs, that colonial history would have been much, much different, because Spain did not then at that point would not have been able to acquire all the gold that they got from the Aztecs to be able to fund all their wars and everything that and their expeditions that was going on actually during that time frame. Spain was in combat war against France and the Ottomans, and they were actually a greater power at the time and would have had to focus more of their attention there. And that would have, and England wasn't that big of a nation, that would have vastly slowed down the colonization of Africa, as well as the colonization of the Americas and the enslavement, plus would have given the Americas time, maybe 100 years, to adapt to the diseases, as well as be introduced into steel and horses and things of that nature. So history would be very much different. But that's not the history that we have. The history that we have is the fact that millions of people were brought over from Africa in order to get gold, to mine gold, silver, copper, and to produce sugar cane, which was a huge cash crop in the Caribbean, especially in Haiti. When you deny that, you deny all the sufferings and all the survival of our ancestors who did go through this horrendous time in world history, and you put a blight on them for that because you feel some kind of way about that idea. But if you feel that kind of way, you still should feel that way about the indigenous people, because they were wiped out and they were enslaved as well. So this attachment to we were already here is just an attachment to this land because you were born here. If you weren't born here, you wouldn't even be saying that. But answer the question: how did such large groups of Yoruba end up in Brazil and Guinea and all these places? It's one that you cannot answer. So you have a great day, and remember always, you have to free yourself to be yourself, because your greatness is non-negotiable. Good journey, good vibrations.